Welcome to When to Shift Left, Move to Center, and Go Right in Testing with Milan Call. Milan is the quality lead at Tyro. He is a strong advocate of quality and shift left testing and is always ready to pick up opportunities for test automation. Milan is adept at implementing solid quality engineering culture wherever he goes. He also writes technical blogs on medium.com and dev.to. As a developer, he has published more than 7 apps on the Fitbit App Store. During today's session, Milan will be answering your questions at the end of the session, but feel free to add them in the Ask a Question window as they arrive. And with that, let's begin.
Hello, everyone. Today's webinar is jam-packed with lots of exciting stuff, and I encourage you all to make notes if possible. While today's topic says when to shift left, move center, and go right in testing, I will leave that to your judgment by showing what to do in various phases of software delivery and testing lifecycle. I will also cover a live demo on API testing from curl to K6, a performance testing tool, my ASAP model of shift left testing approach, a note on accessibility, my key picks when at center, and what does A/B testing mean, a bit on right side, and more. Without a delay, let's get started. I want to begin by a quick dive into historic waterfall model, and then we will move on straight into agile delivery model, continuous testing, and so on. This will be key to set the base for today's webinar. I hope many of us would have experienced, lived, or perhaps enjoyed waterfall model and those days when typical tester statements would have been, my testing is not complete, sorry, you cannot go to production. Oops, critical test scenarios failed. A decision has been made not to go live this week. Usually, trying to complete testing at Friday 6 p.m. just because Monday is a 6 months old planned release date. But the world has changed since then. The traditional tester role has evolved very much. As a matter of fact, I created a public GitHub repository to see how many varieties of role are there for a tester now. Let's have a look. I called it as all QA testing roles globally. And it has so many roles, such as quality engineer, senior QA, senior tester, and even a role named as validation and verification engineer. There are around 130 plus roles listed in this repo, and I'm still counting. By the way, this is a public repository and you are free to contribute if a role is missing. You can either raise a PR or you can use the simple Google form if that's the way you like. And then arrived the famous loop. Does it sound familiar? No? How about now? Still no. What about now? Yes, this loop, which has evolved into various loops, few of which I will cover next. Usually comes into discussion of agile delivery to simplify iterative delivery and continuous testing. And that's where things started changing for testing and how a so-called traditional tester role evolved. As you can see, things were not going out of the door from left to right. As a matter of fact, some went off the loop and some went back for retesting iteratively, let's say. Let me quickly give you some more relevant examples and show you how the loop has evolved over the years. When continuous security testing is happening, while we go to prod, think of each sprint, each branch, or even each commit. We call it as SecOps. Now, the ops will always be there. We have to really go to prod. A more familiar one is the DevOps loop, where continuous development, testing, operations are happening. Interestingly, another modified version you may see often is DevSecOps loop. It's a bit confusing, right? But then these are the things, and these are the ways how things kind of got evolved. To simplify, there is a development happening continuously. So a constant software delivery is happening. Definitely that means constant software testing is also happening. And what if we want to divide that continuous testing into subphases? Left, center, and right. Now, if we shift this figure a little bit on the left-hand side, your output from right goes both inwards and outwards. That is right to left. So there is a connection. You can say it's another way to look at how things have changed after waterfall, and testing has become a continuous process right from start, which means we constantly keep on testing and not just at the end. Although most of the heavy lifting and shifting of testing happens in the center, now that we understand the relationship between agile loop and testing, I guess it's fair call to say that quality in testing is a journey, right? It can be confusing and may change time to time based upon the project needs. And let me show you by giving some examples in next slide. Am I taking the right direction? Let's say you have various situations to test from early development phase to testing close to production. And of course, this goes with time. So for example, you have very less time and there are more releases. So you kind of are going to prod very fast. Other scenario, you have enough time and you're in a new project, so you have plenty of time before you go to prod. So you have so much time to do many things. Another example for some of you would be you are already halfway through your projects, and you are kind of approaching the deadline, right? Some of you might be working on a project which has a lot of bugs to be fixed, so it goes very close to the right-hand side. A last one I can give example is you have time and you have kind of still prod bugs or prod feature releases you have to do somewhere sitting here. It's a journey, not so straight, but you can build a baseline to decide what falls in center, what goes in left, and what comes in the right hand side. So it's a continuous journey, right? And this journey may include some key milestone phases. So I'm going to be walking you through a few of them. Number one should be awareness. Keeping everyone from top to bottom in the loop that quality is owned by everyone, not just the tester of the team. Second key deliverable is security. It should be planned way ahead, even before writing your first code. Performance is no more just a load testing to be done at the end. I have a live demo of one of the tools in this webinar coming for you. And the most important is repeat. Automate as much as you can for test automation, for security, for performance, but make sure you include all the 3 key data points on the left. You should keep in mind for higher chances of success in this journey, you need to improve repeatedly. Before we go next, I wanted to pass on things very interesting and important, not only on accessibility and my experience as an automation tester with it. As we know, like others, people with disabilities have bank accounts, use mobile phones, and while we all want the world to go fast with digitization, we have introduced things which are so complex, such as QR codes, mobile based check ins, more SMS notifications, and email alerts for all of the above. There is nothing wrong, but have you thought what could be the impact of digitization or a poor digitization on users with limited ability, such as if they want to use your website or mobile apps? Well, you may be thinking that's okay, but what as a tester or an advocate of quality can I do? Well, a lot, I would say. I will come to that, and I assure you, you can do much more than you think for everyone, including your business. Let me tell you some interesting facts on accessibility if you have not spent much time on it. While it's a short, nearly 3 minutes of video, I will kind of pause here. And if you want to scan or note down the URL, it would be a worth watching video, I would say. Perhaps go ahead and show it to your teams in office. This video is a simple video of Telly, who is legally blind, and show you how blind people not only use phones and apps, but also how they use it to take photos and videos. Additionally, how they maintain their privacy. Think of somebody looking at a phone used by a blind person. And this is all because of the inbuilt mobile accessibility that Apple and Android provides as of now. And these are some of the key points which you should keep in mind. I have taken all these references from the official websites of Apple and Android. Back to the question, what can I do about it? The answer is simple and even easy. If you shift left and work with your developer, ask or even yourself add accessibility IDs to your mobile apps or websites under test, and use those unique accessibility IDs in your test automation. How does that sound? Killing two birds with one stone? To say the same thing neatly, get two giggles from one tickle. This is not only give stability to your ever-changing XPaths and all those variable values you use, but also alert you if any change, such as a button getting detected or not getting detected or deleted by mistake during development. For web, I would recommend instead of asking developers to add data test IDs, go with accessibility IDs, especially for images, and your test would almost never fail on image load, such as element not found exception in Selenium. Yes, they may be exceptions, but remember, irrespective of contributing to your automation just for 80-90%, each time you add a unique accessibility ID, it's contributing back to the community 100%. Let me give you a visual on how it can be easily done on iOS and Android. So this GIF shows how easy it is to capture and fix feedback inside the IDE to increase accessibility of the app under test. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I'm not a developer. I am 100% functional tester. Or I'm a SME. I work for a company that just deals in testing. We don't have access to source code. Well, the good news is there are other ways to contribute to accessibility, such as manual testing. Interact with your app using Android accessibility services or inbuilt accessibility inspectors in MacBooks. Doing automation testing, as I just said, adding more and more accessibility IDs rather than trying to search those broken XPaths. And Espresso has gone way beyond it if you want to explore. User testing. Get feedback from real people who interact with your app. and make sure you have inclusion in the list of the people who test your app. If you were to go above and beyond, get yourself blindfolded and try to launch, log in, or maybe just navigate through the app with accessibility mode, such as voiceover or to iOS. A simple screenshot showing how each element can have a unique accessibility ID added to the app under development. And icing on the cake, interestingly, adding accessibility IDs have never broken a business flow in my experience. Give it a try. Now we are all on the same page about the loops as well as accessibility. I would like to jump into the topic by giving a small practical demo on API testing. Shift left. Let's use a simple curl command to hit my GitHub user. Whoa, it's huge. So what basically has happened is curl has worked successfully and it has returned me the HTML page, basically the body of my response. But what we are interested here is to make simple. So I'll directly go to a magic command and try to see what is the response code for this respect. Yes, so the request is a response code 200, which was expected. This is how fast you can do it using curl. Now let's use hopscotch, similar to the postman, and just send a get request to my GitHub repo. Let's see what's happening. Similar kind of response is there. And if you see, we also have a test to see if the response level is around 200. Yes, it's 200. Let's get started with this tool called as K6, in which we will be running a small performance test on this file. Basically a small tiny JavaScript file where I have imported HTTP and sleep from K6 library. And it has got just one function where you are basically hitting a get endpoint. And I have put a sleep of 1 second. You can change it to whatever you like. So let's get started. To run the performance test using K6, you just have to say K6 run, then hit this enter. And within a second, it would most probably give you all the details more than you would have imagined for single virtual user. Now, this doesn't happen one user using the website. Maybe you have more users. So to increase number of users, let's say virtual users, let's say 5, and then for a duration of 3 seconds. What happens if 5 users are hitting your website for 3 seconds back to back? So this is 5 virtual users for 3 seconds. So just a quick difference. The data received when multiple users were hitting was 2.2 megabytes, and the data sent was just 8.1 kilobytes. However, it was in kilobytes when there was only a single user. Now that you may not need to see all these printed results and you just want to generate the load. So what to do? You just put an option no summary. And hit the same script. So it does generate that load without putting all these details which you may not like and you may have a different reporting system. That's it on K6. What can you do in testing when on left-hand side? Especially when you have very little development work completed to be tested. I call that as an ASAP model, in which number one for me is accessibility. Help designers design accessibility first design during their UI brainstorming. Later, work with the devs to add unique accessibility IDs, or maybe you go yourself and add it there. For example, ARIA labels for web, content description for Android, accessibility description and accessibility IDs for iOS. S stands for security, and security starts from first line of code. Think of setting up IDE plugin for your developers as an industry standard or quality best practice, and especially for new developers who kind of keep on getting onboarded into the company or from different project, that kind of thing. You can really lead. Next one on my list is definitely automation. Yes, you can do automation beforehand, and I will tell you how. So what you can do is you can build the base framework for your test automation. And if those who have experience of building test automation would know that sometimes it may take weeks, if not months, right? And then now that you are already working on point number one, which is accessibility, and you have kind of a base framework ready, and if you still think you have time on the left hand side, you can way ahead go and start adding those accessibility IDs added by designers and developers, or perhaps maybe by yourself, and logically get your automation on a high level ready to be ran in the test environment. And the last one for of my ASAP model is performance. Talk to your solution architect or tech lead or maybe just software developer to understand the architecture of the system if you haven't seen it. This thing usually is the baseline before the actual project kickoff or coding starts. And when you meet them, ask them, what is the user load projection for the future system? What are peak and off-peak times they think users will use their system under test? Speak and get agreement on SLOs, SLIs with observability team or platform teams in your company. Once you're done with all these things in the ASAP model, agree and document the definition of done with the team and take it from there. Move to center. Now that we have an understanding of what happens on left during early phases of development, let's try to understand when we try to go towards right, what happens in the middle of it. So, center. At center, you do a lot of testing. Like I said, most heavy testing oriented phase, where there are lots of moving parts and team, code, and testers starts collaborating regularly within themselves. Let's go through what are the main things we should not miss when we are at center. Compliance testing or conformance testing is the testing or other activities that determine whether a process, product, or service complies with the requirements of specification, technical standards, contract, or regulation. This is critical when you are working on a BFSI, that is banking, finance, service and insurance domain, health domain, and similar. Next, end-to-end testing is a technique that tests the entire software product from beginning to the end to ensure the application's flows behaves as expected. The main purpose of end-to-end testing is to test from the end user's experience, maybe by simulating the real user scenarios and validating the system under test and its components for integration and data integrity. Next, negative path testing. This one is pretty interesting. So just think of a test case where the circumstances that like the application is supposed to handle an error, but then it doesn't work well. For example, a negative path test of a credit card payment scenario might assume that user attempted to use an expired credit card, but then during negative path testing, it will verify that the system handled the situation gracefully or not. I mean, that is in the case of an expired credit card, a negative path test may verify that that a notification alert the user, that their payment failed due to a bad credit card number and prompts them to enter new information kind of thing. right? So that was negative part testing. Over to next. Next is test data. Both generating test data on demand and validating the system by various inputs, basically various kind of test data, mostly negative. And this kind of ascertains that the system behaves expectedly, both in positive and negative scenarios of pushing out those test data. And you kind of validate it, like if an API throws a right error message or a web page has a redirect, if the page not found kind of error message, and more examples like that. And by the way, you can create your own automation tools to generate or reuse synthetic test data. Those tools are really helpful. They kind of generate, the user payload and simulate the real user data coming into your system. And if you are coming from a JavaScript background, you would have known about a library named as faker.js. It's very unique and it almost randomly generates all kind of user data. For example, address, validate, phone numbers, even words. So have a look at that and validating system by various inputs, which is again kind of a test data, mostly negative, is needed to ascertain the system behaves expectedly. For example, throwing a right error message or an API redirect or negative scenarios. You can create or reuse synthetic test data generation tools as much as you want in this phase, maybe to emulate real user data payload. If you have used JavaScript library faker.js, you should have known that almost any fake and randomly generated data can be created on the fly, such as address, date, phone number, words, noun, verb, etc. Next, regression testing. Yes, so this is a phase where systems already are talking to each other, and then a thorough testing has to happen over here, either through manual or functional techniques or through the automation you have been building till now. So a type of test commonly run on a new build, which ensures that the previously tested functionality is still working, kind of falls into the regression testing criteria. Because new functionality might accidentally break old functionality in unexpected ways. So regression testing is especially important in an environment with constant or continuous delivery of new builds. Next. Exploratory testing. This is my favorite. A hands-on testing approach which involves minimal planning on the part of a QA team. Exploratory testing can support more formal strategies or play an important role in verifying the application by attempting unexpected actions. So it's not really negative testing, but this is, a real user testing. Exploratory testing is commonly employed in security, where penetration testers play a role of, let's say, hackers, commonly called as red team in the security circles, attempting to break the system. Exploratory testing may involve throwing invalid inputs, changing networks on the fly. Just think of a scenario like you are testing a mobile app which needs users location access, and then you start using app without giving the location access. So kind of a scenario which is expected, but not a happy path, right? So these kind of things kind of fall under exploratory testing, and there can be more. These were my top picks for doing things in center. There might be many more things you are already doing or you're planning to do. Feel free to pick these if you like and keep on taking up your own points. Go right. One example I would like to explain is A/B testing. Generally, in live environment, aka production, users are displayed two flavors of the product, such as a website. Let's say half of them are seeing one variant and rest 50% the other. While doing so, users' feedback is collected in various ways, such as analytics, rate the app pop-up, observing which version is crashing more and which one is getting more attention. That leads to retention and eventually understanding customer conversion ratio. You may see a business grow with one flavor over the other, let's say 30%, 16%. These types of testing are both done early in the phase of software development as well as on the stable products. The goal is to grow business by user behaviors, and testers play a critical role in validating, providing inputs, and many times setting up tools such as Launch Darkly to make sure both versions go live and does not impact BAU. If you have multiple test environments, these features are even tested with project managers or product owners.
A/B testing is one of the techniques when we have to do testing after going live. But there are many things you can do just before going live. And I'll walk you through a few of those.
Number 1, release or rollout testing, such as beta testing, canary release, A/B testing. You must be really clear on the scope and timeline when you're doing this kind of testing. To give an example of active testing in this phase, think of a product verification testing, or some may call it as production verification testing, generally said as PVT testing, right? That kind of testing is very important during this phase of the software testing. Next I'm going to be talking about is integration or interoperability, internationalization testing. So in a summary, how components of application interact with one another is being tested here, and especially how they operate as a group. For example, your users are not able to log in, but then this can be because of many reasons, such as your system is waiting for authentication server, and maybe that authentication server is hosted on your cloud provider, which may be not available at the moment, and so on and so forth. So the goal is to find out problems in interfaces and communication between components. Next, I call it G-test. So G-testing can be GUI testing or UI testing to check for issues such as UX or UI during the final product integration if they have slipped by any chance. G testing can be gray box testing as well, which is a combination of kind of white box testing and black box testing. Now, on right hand side, remember, testers are usually the first internal customers, and they are the one who basically know the system in and out. So their experience of both white box and looking things like a user is really key over here. You can also add guerrilla testing to the list, which is an intense round of testing, quite often, redirecting all available resources to the activity. The idea here is to test as much as of the application in a short period of time. The next one on the list is high order. High order testing checks that the software meets customer requirements and that the software, along with other software or system elements, meet the functional, behavioral, and performance requirement. A kind of a very high level, right? As the name suggests. It uses black box techniques and of course requires an outsider perspective, more of like a user perspective. Now, the most important thing, while I was explaining all these phases and how to tackle with them with some kind of testing, on the right hand side, you basically have to do repeat testing, which you might have not covered in any of these from left to right. And it basically is an input to left. In the world of testing, Reporting is of utmost importance. Testers are required and always asked to certify their work with evidences. It's not that bad, though. In fact, I would say it's an indication that the work you are doing is highly trusted. Most of the forward-looking companies use such incidents as a lesson for future and keep improving rather than finger pointing. Remember, quality is owned by everyone. So what are the key takeaways for this webinar? One of the key takeaways, now we know that how the role of tester and importance of testing has evolved over the time. Another one is recognizing how to approach testing during various phases of SDLC. We also got to know how to build an understanding of what type of testing is suitable from left to right. We also got a guideline on when to use one or the other and kind of a handover between two phases. And we discussed about what to do before development begins. Last one, when you should and shouldn't automate. This was not explicitly called on any of the slide, but if you go back and think about it, things such as A/B testing, exploratory testing, accessibility testing with a real user, you can't automate them, but they are necessary. So these are my key takeaways and the conclusion. I really thank all of you for joining me in this webinar today. Thank you.
Ben asks, it seems like every time developers get a chance, they'll deprioritize testing. How do we get devs to care about testing?
Yeah, actually, Ben, thanks for your question. I think it's a really, really good question and kind of a challenge because, devs are too good at building things and then, QAs are too good at, finding things which are not working. And it's very hard to get that mindset into a head of a developer. But then there are ways to get over it. One of the ways you can kind of employ is getting the process and practices into the picture. So for example, you can try to implement TDD practices like test-driven development where development starts with a test case. So we start with a test case which is failing, and then we kind of continuously improve and grow the product until the test case passes. So basically to reach that final goal, you kind of keep on doing negative testing. Another one, if you have a QA tester or a quality engineer in your team, I would recommend them to run more exploratory testing sessions with the devs. And some interesting name for those sessions can be Bug Blitz, Bug Bash, where you kind of gather everybody, not just devs, product owners, delivery managers. And as the leader of that session, you kind of come up with the test data, ready with the test environments, and assign everybody a unique test case or maybe a couple of them. And that's where they kind of jump in as a user, not as a tester, and they kind of do that testing which you are expecting from them. And there are many more such ways. I hope you kind of get a direction of where to start. But yeah, if you have more questions, just please pop up in the QA section.
All right. Next question. Should exploratory testing be only done in center, or can we do that before or after center?
Yeah, it's a good question, Pam. It's not really, we don't really have to stick with the left, right, and center. There are fair chances the sections overlap with each other, depending upon the pace of delivery. For example, some teams have 2-week sprints, some teams have 3-week sprints. So it kind of keeps on sliding. But the important thing to note here is as soon as you start building even a small piece of a chunk piece of a working product, you are all set to go for exploratory testing. And as much as exploratory testing you do, you kind of find the bugs early in the cycle.
All right, another one has come in. Do you feel testers should be technical enough to read and write code?
A bit of yes and no. While this agile delivery model has come into picture, as I showed in the beginning, waterfall model where testers used to do testing at the end has changed. So even if you're not writing code, I think read a lot of repositories, and just during reading, I have found many bugs on the code level. And it kind of gives back confidence to testers as well, right? To go into the code and, ask those questions more confidently. So yes, should be, and no, can be. So it all depends.
I think you handled that very deftly. There are lots of that could have been a can of worms, as we like to say here.
Thanks,
yes,
man.
Yes. All right. Guy wants to know, what is your favorite or most effective shift left activity to run with a software delivery team?
Yeah, good question, Guy. Thanks for asking that. I would really concentrate on the section which I specifically put into my webinar on accessibility, not just because we want to improve the system for the people, disabled people, or people with challenges, although they are usually very limited number of customers for a business. But if we start having that mindset right from development, it's so easy for developers to add those unique IDs, and it would not change your business flow, right? And at the same time, you are getting too much way advanced in your automation, because the traditional challenge with automation, even if you take the latest tool and technology, is the software itself. It's very unstable in the sense business requirements keep on changing. Your XPath, your item ID, text box name, everything keeps on changing so frequently in every release. And if you keep that IDs, accessibility IDs, and work closely with the devs, you are already doing a bit of manual testing on the left-hand side, as well as preparing for your automation on the center.
How do you influence developers to do TDD or other shift left practices when their manager is not interested in testing quality?
It's a very, very interesting question. I think as an advocate of quality, if you are in that role, and you don't really need to be aligned with the manager to say that everybody should do testing. Like I said, quality is everybody's job. If their manager is not aligned, I think there would be very valid reason. They have very less time for production for this release or one or two release. But if somebody is really against the quality as a manager, I have never seen that in my experience, by the way. But if it's still happening, I think it's a good call to have the whole team into one meeting room, do a retro of what all bugs you have found in last 2-3 sprints, talk about it, let the team give the feedback. And I'm sure once the team is in your favor, and then you are also part of that team during that discussion, right? You're one team. So I'm sure the outcome would always be on the side of like, you should do more testing, or focus on the quality of the product.
Absolutely. Okay, another question. What is your opinion on testers being part of a requirement review as a shift left approach?
Yeah, I think the answer is in the question itself. So definitely QA should be involved in any of the planning and sessions right from start. Reason being, most of the projects go iterative. So basically, when you are giving your inputs on the left-hand side on requirements, you are kind of already having a base product most of the time, right? That means you already have some knowledge about the working system, and new features, new delivery tasks are coming. So testers are the right people, or QAs are the right group of people who have the right say to go back and input their understanding on requirements, because they have the eagle eye view of the product usually, which developers or few teams, back-end, front-end teams don't have. So yes, I do agree. As I said, answer is in the question. Testers must be involved in the early phases of requirement analysis.
Okay. All right. There is a question Vishal is asking. As per the slides and the demo, accessibility should be done on the left side of the testing journey. However, during the initial development phase, more focus should be given on functional aspect of the product rather than accessibility.
Yeah, it's a bit of tricky, because you build that base on the left-hand side for accessibility, but you really use it in the center and at the end. When I say center, at the end, so once you have built that base of adding accessibility IDs, in the center during your regression, during your actual automation framework building, you kind of go very fast about that. rather than asking too late after the development is done. Now, the other part is you really have to build all these accessibility, things into the software, usually the front-end components, because when you do the user testing at the end, you already have things set in place, and it's pretty much gonna give you more better results. I hope that answers your question. If not, please let me know.
Okay, we have another question. How do we rely on shift left testing if so many people got access to the test environment and the test data keeps changing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real challenge. Thank you very much, whoever has asked this question. The test data is a challenge. Test environments are a challenge. We all know in all the environments, but I would recommend don't rely on a static test data. Don't rely on that specific test user which you have been using for weeks, if not months. Rather plan to build simple intuitive test tools, like I was talking about faker.js, and develop test data on the fly. If you have those tools, trust me, your developers would even consume those tools in their testing when they're writing unit test cases, component test cases, or system integration test cases. So rather than living with the challenge of test data and test environment, think of working with devs, building small, tiny test tools. You don't really have to build like a huge, complex project to just generate test data. Because if you think on a very simple term, you get people in production, right? People join your business. You know how easy it is for a user to onboard any project these days, log in or create account. So basically, it's hitting some APIs behind the scene, right? So you have to just compile those set of very minimal APIs and generate those test data on the fly. And that would get you away from the challenge of so many people jumping onto same test environment and the fight for the test data.
All right, one more question. Ben is asking, I find TDD is very rarely practiced in reality, and invariably tests gets added after the dev work has finished. Is there a problem with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, not everybody is so keen to have TDD. I have worked in same companies where one team follows TDD very religiously and the other one really don't care about it. So it kind of depends upon the maturity of the team. If you think you are going to be implementing TDD first time in a team, yes, there would be a lot of challenges, there would be pushbacks, but then if you're really wanting to evaluate the outcome of the whole, implementing these new practices, if team as one team agree to that, I mean, there are long-term benefits of that is for sure. But then, Ben, I think I answered you in the previous question. So TDD is one of the approach, right? So if devs are interested to do more feature testing, get results fast, I think end-to-end testing, exploratory testing is your go-to point to start with.
Okay, can we put the requirements in the left always as in Agile development when it keeps on changing? How do you think, as a quality lead manager, requirements can be managed in such a project?
Yeah, it's tricky with Agile, right? I mean, you kind of decide what you are going to be doing in the sprint, and then many times during the sprint it changes, the requirement changes, the scope changes. So it's very hard to stop those requirements coming in. They will keep on coming, and that's why the word Agile is being there. Now, the other way to overcome this constant changes coming into for development testing both, you have to kind of go with the estimation, story points. That's the key things which Agile comes with. So you kind of have that 80-20 rule where 80% you have fixed goals and 20% you have a sliding window of the things coming at the last moment, production issues, support, or things like that. However, I would say that in terms of requirements, there's one more thing you can add to your Jiras or stories. That is a definition of done. So if you can limit definition of done to the things you're going to be delivering, you will really know how much of this you can do and how much of it can come as a variable and you are ready to handle it. So, great.
I did want to mention to all of our participants, Milan spoke today about accessibility testing. I loved your ASAP plan. I think that was great. Apple Tools has a number of features that can help you with that. On the left side of your screen, there's a link where you can explore the platform. If you have questions about that, our testing specialists are happy to help you with that. You can also request a demo and see that in person. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about visual testing, or honestly anything about test automation, I would also like to point you to Test Automation University. It's a free, absolutely free resource for courses all about test automation. You can scan the QR code in front of you for quick access, or visit testautomationu.appletools.com. All right, Milan, I see 2 more questions that have come in. Right?
Yeah.
How can we differentiate between a QA and a tester? Boy, that's a loaded one, isn't it?
Yeah, as I don't know if you joined at the beginning of the session, so I actually walked you through how the quality role or the tester role has evolved over the time. In my GitHub repo, I was showing there are 130 plus QA roles in the market, and I'm still getting inputs to get that updated. So I think it's more about the mindset. It's not about the title of the role. So the people having the quality mindset can be developers, can be testers as well. It doesn't really matter what's the title over there. But to lead the quality, I think we really need people who have a background in testing. And that's for sure, because as I said, testers are good at looking, on the top level view of things which are going to go to the deliver. They are more empathetic to customers or end users than the code, right? And that's other way around with the developers usually. So no real difference between QA or tester. I think it's more about the mindset, and anybody who is having a quality mindset is already playing the role of a tester.
Okay, one last question. Which one do you think should come first, TDD or BDD, to achieve the objective of better quality?
Both. So there are many ways. So TDD is mostly employed in backend projects where you really don't have users. You have test cases where you have APIs. So you kind of go with that failing test case of an API calling to something and then starting with 500 till you get 200 and so on and so forth. So usually TDD goes with extreme programming. That's where the developers are more keen to pick up, and those things are usually employed when you don't even have a tester in the team. So teams usually go with TDD practice, right? They write test cases with the help of BA or product on. And in behavioral development, BDD is mostly employed in a project or a product where there is a user interface, where there is a behavior driven from the user's perspective. And that's where QAs are mostly considered as a critical, people as a lead of quality. So a bit of different. And I haven't seen any team really going with both the ways until it's a very huge project and you have a completely full team of testers versus a huge team of developers. I hope that gives you answer what you were looking for.
Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you again at a future event.
Thank you, Pam, for organizing. And thank you very much all for asking tricky questions. I hope to see you again.